Raise your hand if you're tired of watching Canadian jobs and businesses threatened every time American politics takes a turn. For generations, our economic dependency on the US market has left us vulnerable to political winds from Washington. But an alternative is finally emerging that could change everything for Canadian workers and businesses. Canadian and Mexican officials have developed a 6-point economic strategy to reduce both nations' dependence on American markets. Most Canadians remain unaware of how significantly this could transform our economic landscape. In this video, I'll break down the strategy, explain how it affects key Canadian industries like automotive, agriculture, and energy, and show why many economists believe this could be the beginning of a new era of Canadian economic stability and growth. The Tariff Storm. How Trump's trade tactics created a North American crisis. Did you know that Canada and Mexico send over 75% of their exports to the United States? This massive dependency has left both nations economically exposed, and Trump knows it. When he announced his latest round of tariff threats, it wasn't just another negotiating tactic. It was a carefully calculated economic siege designed to exploit this vulnerability to maximum effect. What makes these threats particularly concerning is how Trump plans to implement them. Instead of working within the established USMCA framework, he's signaled he'll invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. This obscure piece of legislation allows a president to declare a national emergency and bypass trade agreement protections entirely. It's essentially a trade nuclear option that renders the carefully negotiated USMCA safeguards completely useless. The potential devastation for Canadian industries can't be overstated. Let's look at the automotive sector, which would face a crushing 25% tariff under Trump's plan. Economic models show this single action would eliminate over 278,000 Canadian jobs and slash wages by 2.6% across the economy. The ripple effects would be felt in communities throughout Ontario and beyond. What makes the automotive sector particularly vulnerable is the integrated nature of production. A typical Canadian-made vehicle doesn't just cross the border once, it zigzags back and forth multiple times during assembly. Parts manufactured in Ontario might be shipped to Michigan for processing, returned to Canada for assembly, and then exported back to the US as a finished vehicle. Each border crossing becomes a potential tariff collection point, effectively multiplying the impact. Trump's energy tariff strategy reveals another layer of calculated pressure. By proposing a 10% tariff on Canadian energy while hitting Mexican energy with 25%, he's created a wedge between natural allies. The different treatment serves a dual purpose. It prevents the two nations from feeling equally threatened while still applying significant economic pressure on both. We're already seeing real-world disruption from these threats. Stellantis, the parent company of Chrysler, actually shut down its Windsor, Ontario plant for 2 full weeks. They weren't striking or retooling, they were simply assessing how Trump's proposed tariffs would impact their business model. Think about that. Mere threats caused a major manufacturer to halt production completely. Perhaps most troubling is how Trump has framed these economic weapons. By connecting trade policy to migration and fentanyl issues under a national emergency justification, he's created a dangerous precedent. Any perceived diplomatic disagreement could now trigger economically devastating tariffs. It fundamentally changes how nations must approach negotiations with the United States. Inside sources reveal this isn't just Trump acting on impulse. Key advisors Peter Navarro and Stephen Miller have emerged as the architects of this strategy. They've reportedly developed a comprehensive plan to use economic pressure to force concessions on issues completely unrelated to trade. It's economic coercion elevated to official policy. What they didn't anticipate was the response. Canada and Mexico, traditional competitors in many economic sectors, have recognized this approach as an existential threat to both their economies. Behind closed doors, unprecedented collaboration has begun between these neighbors. Trade ministers from both nations have been meeting privately, comparing notes and developing joint contingency plans, something that would have been politically unthinkable just a few years ago. Canadian Trade Minister Mary Ng and Mexican Economy Secretary Raquel Buenrostro have established a direct channel bypassing Washington entirely. Their teams are now working on coordinated responses designed to maximize economic pressure on vulnerable US sectors if tariffs are imposed. It's a defensive alliance born of necessity. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this video, we'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe to the channel. Did you know over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing? Subscribing is free and it helps us create more content you love. So go ahead and hit that button. It only takes a second. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. The six-point alliance inside the Canada-Mexico economic strategy. This defensive alliance has rapidly evolved into something far more ambitious than just tariff countermeasures. When officials from both nations gathered in Mexico City for what they called a routine trade discussion, they emerged with a six-point strategy document that's anything but routine, a comprehensive economic roadmap that could fundamentally alter North America's trade balance forever. The January meeting between Canadian and Mexican business leaders wasn't just another diplomatic photo opportunity. It was the culmination of months of behind-the-scenes collaboration that has now produced tangible results. The joint report they released, titled Perfilados Rumbo al Crecimiento, Profiles Toward Growth, outlines 6 specific recommendations that form the backbone of their emerging economic partnership. Let's break down what's actually in this groundbreaking agreement. The first key point focuses on promoting strategic investment in priority sectors. This isn't vague diplomatic language, it's a concrete commitment to redirect capital flows between Canada and Mexico in industries where both countries have complementary strengths. Think Canadian mining expertise combining with Mexican manufacturing capabilities, or shared investment in healthcare technology where both nations face similar challenges. The second point addresses something truly revolutionary: streamlining cross-border workforce mobility directly between Canada and Mexico. This means creating specialized visa programs and professional certification recognition that would allow skilled workers to move freely between these two countries without involving the US at all. Engineers, healthcare workers, and technology specialists could soon have direct pathways that bypass American immigration entirely. Point 3 gets to the heart of their strategy: developing joint policies specifically designed to reduce US dependency. This includes coordinated strategies for diversifying export markets, particularly targeting Europe and Asia, where both countries have existing but underdeveloped trade relationships. It also involves sharing intelligence on US trade tactics to develop more effective countermeasures. The fourth element focuses on sub-federal engagement, creating direct relationships between Canadian provinces and Mexican states. Ontario and Jalisco, for example, are already exploring a technology corridor focused on artificial intelligence and software development that would create an innovation pipeline completely independent of Silicon Valley. Perhaps most surprising is the fifth point: increasing public-private collaboration to create supply chains that bypass US middlemen entirely. This means restructuring entire industries to eliminate the need for American companies as intermediaries. New shipping routes, shared logistics networks, and joint distribution systems are already being developed to connect Canadian and Mexican businesses directly. The final piece of the strategy establishes a bilateral center for women and minority-led businesses. This isn't just about diversity, it's about developing entirely new entrepreneurial channels between the two countries in sectors that have traditionally been overlooked. The center will provide financing, mentorship, and market access, specifically tailored to help these businesses expand across borders. And this isn't just theoretical. The economic commitment is already substantial, with Canadian direct investment in Mexico reaching $40.4 billion in 2023. That makes Mexico Canada's 9th largest investment destination globally, a figure that's grown by over 60% in just 5 years. Mexican investment in Canada, while smaller, has been growing at an even faster rate, particularly in technology and renewable energy. What's truly remarkable is what economic analysts are now predicting. New models suggest that by reducing their US dependency, Canada and Mexico could actually emerge stronger in the long term. A comprehensive study by the Bank of Canada projects that bilateral trade between the two countries could increase by 30% over 5 years if they implement all 6 points of their strategy. The same study suggests this could add nearly 1.2% to both countries' GDP over the same period, growth that would previously have been captured by American intermediaries. This represents a fundamental shift in North American economic dynamics, explains Dr. Elena Rodriguez, lead economist at Mexico's Universidad Nacional Autónoma. For decades, both countries oriented their economies toward the US as the dominant partner. What we're seeing now is the emergence of a true trilateral relationship where Canada and Mexico are developing direct economic links that don't depend on Washington's approval. Battlefield Industries: how the alliance targets auto, agriculture and energy. Dr. Rodriguez isn't just theorizing about economic shifts, she's witnessing them transform entire industries right before our eyes. The automotive sector, where Mexico stands as the world's fourth largest vehicle exporter, has become ground zero for this economic realignment, with assembly lines from Monterrey to Ontario already being reconfigured to bypass US supply chains completely. What makes this transformation particularly powerful is how perfectly the two countries complement each other. Mexico brings massive manufacturing capacity and established export channels to the table, while Canada contributes abundant critical minerals and some of North America's cleanest electricity grids. Together, they're crafting something US manufacturers should fear: a vertically integrated EV supply chain that doesn't need American participation. This isn't speculative, it's already happening. At Guanajuato's sprawling industrial park, Mexican automotive giant Nemak has partnered with Canadian battery innovator E1 Moly Energy to develop electric vehicle components specifically designed for export markets beyond the US. We're reimagining our entire production strategy, confirms Nemak's operations director Carlos Velázquez. Our facilities can pivot production towards South American and European markets within months, not years. Meanwhile, Canadian auto parts manufacturer Linamar Corporation has established a new logistics hub in Coahuila, Mexico, explicitly designed to facilitate non-US export channels. Their CEO, Linda Hasenfratz, didn't mince words when announcing the investment. We're creating resilience through diversification. The days of our industry being completely tethered to US market whims are ending. The agricultural sector shows equally ambitious coordination. The newly formed Canada-Mexico Agriculture Partnership has already secured agreements with distributors in Japan, South Korea and Vietnam markets that traditionally relied on US agricultural imports. Canadian grain producers are combining shipments with Mexican fruit and vegetable exports to create more competitive logistics costs, undercutting US competitors in Asian markets. By combining our complementary agricultural outputs, we're achieving economies of scale that weren't possible separately, explains Ricardo Garza of Mexico's National Agricultural Council. Canadian wheat and canola alongside Mexican avocados and berries creates year-round supply reliability that Asian buyers value tremendously. Perhaps most strategically important is the energy sector collaboration. Canada's expertise in hydroelectric and nuclear energy paired with Mexico's solar capacity and manufacturing base is creating a clean energy powerhouse. The newly announced Renewable Integration Network will connect Canadian green energy technology with Mexican manufacturing, producing everything from advanced solar panels to grid-scale battery storage solutions. The Mineral Resource Partnership particularly threatens US technological dominance. Canada's rich deposits of nickel, cobalt and copper combined with Mexico's vast lithium reserves create a complete battery supply chain outside US control. The Trudeau government has already committed $2.5 billion to establish processing facilities specifically designed to supply Mexican battery manufacturers. These cross-sector initiatives are yielding impressive results. Internal forecasts from Canada's Export Development Corporation project a 15 to 20% reduction in US-dependent supply chains within just 3 years. A seismic shift in North American economic integration that would have been unthinkable before Trump's tariff threats. But these industry-specific initiatives are part of a more comprehensive economic strategy. Sources close to both governments confirm a 6-point approach being implemented. First, creating integrated supply chains that minimize US participation. Second, establishing coordinated tariff responses that maximize leverage against American policies. Third, developing joint infrastructure projects including new ports and transportation corridors specifically designed for bilateral trade. The remaining elements are equally ambitious. Fourth, shared R&D investments in key technologies to reduce dependency on US intellectual property. Fifth, a unified diplomatic approach when engaging with other trade partners. And sixth, aggressive alternative market development in Europe, Asia, and South America. Canadian International Trade Minister confirms the strategic nature of these efforts. We're not just responding to immediate tariff threats. We're building long-term economic resilience that ensures Canadian prosperity regardless of which administration holds power in Washington. Economic tremors, how the alliance threatens US prosperity. That long-term economic resilience isn't just protecting Mexican and Canadian economies, it's actively dismantling America's regional economic dominance. When 33% of US exports suddenly face two motivated customers working together to buy elsewhere, the ripple effects hit hard across countless American communities. What's truly alarming is how precisely the Canada-Mexico alliance can target vulnerable US sectors for maximum economic pressure. The numbers paint a troubling picture for American prosperity. Economic forecasts show that while a unilateral 25% US tariff would reduce American exports to its neighbors by 6%, a coordinated retaliatory response from both countries would inflict a 9% export decline. But these aggregate figures mask the devastating sector-specific impacts lurking beneath the surface. Mining is particularly vulnerable, with US exports to Canada projected to plummet nearly 60% under initial tariffs. But if both countries implement their coordinated strategy, American mining exports would effectively vanish, suffering a catastrophic 97% contraction that would devastate communities across resource-rich states. The broad economic impact is equally concerning. The Peterson Institute's latest modeling suggests that coordinated Canada-Mexico retaliation would slash US GDP growth by 0.3 percentage points, enough to potentially tip a fragile economy into recession. More painfully, this economic contraction translates to over 400,000 American jobs lost across manufacturing, agriculture, and service sectors. American consumers won't escape the pain either. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston projects US inflation could surge by 1.3 percentage points as retaliatory tariffs drive up prices for everyday goods. At a time when inflation concerns already dominate kitchen table conversations, this additional pressure could force painful budgetary choices for millions of American families. The automotive industry faces perhaps the most complex disruption. As integrated production networks unravel, American consumers could see vehicle prices spike by $4,000 to $7,000 per unit. Thomas Wilson, chief economist at the Center for Automotive Research, explains, "When you force the North American auto sector to fragment along national lines, you don't just lose efficiency, you create massive new costs that inevitably get passed to consumers." Even your grocery bill tells the story of American vulnerability. Mexican imports currently account for 2/3 of US vegetable consumption and roughly half of all fruit and nuts. Agricultural economists project price increases of 25% or more for these staples if the tariff war escalates, translating to hundreds of dollars in additional annual food costs for the average American household. What's particularly notable is the unprecedented business response. The US Chamber of Commerce has formed a dedicated North American trade defense coalition comprising over 200 major companies alarmed by the potential damage. According to internal documents, the coalition is preparing a $50 million advocacy campaign warning of catastrophic supply chain disruptions if the tariff threats continue. "We're witnessing something we've never seen before," explains Jeffrey Williams, Director of Global Trade at the US Chamber. American businesses are directly lobbying against policies ostensibly designed to protect them. They understand that in today's integrated economy, these tariffs are self-inflicted wounds. Perhaps most concerning for American economic leadership is the long-term outlook. The Congressional Budget Office now projects that a permanent Canada-Mexico strategic alliance could reduce US economic leverage in North America by 25 to 30% over the next decade. This diminished influence, combined with diversified trade patterns, represents a potential $200 billion loss to the American economy. a structural shift that would reshape North American commerce for generations. Senator Maria Cantwell, chair of the Commerce Committee, recently acknowledged the gravity of the situation, stating, "We're facing a fundamental realignment of North American trade patterns that threatens to diminish decades of American economic leadership in our own backyard." This isn't about short-term politics, it's about whether we'll maintain our central position in the continent's economic future. What we're witnessing isn't just a temporary alliance, but a fundamental reimagining of the North American economic landscape. This Canada-Mexico partnership represents the first time in modern history that both nations have strategically aligned to counter US economic pressure rather than competing for American favor. For ordinary Canadians, this shift offers both opportunity and uncertainty. While greater economic independence could provide shelter from US political volatility, it requires sustained investment in new trade relationships that may take years to fully develop. The true test comes when Washington recognizes the threat to its economic dominance. Will political leaders in Ottawa and Mexico City maintain their resolve when the diplomatic pressure intensifies? Thanks for watching. What do you think about Canada and Mexico joining forces to challenge the US economic dominance? Do you believe this new alliance will successfully reduce their dependency on the American market, or could this strategy backfire? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss an update. Your support helps me keep bringing you in-depth analyses on important economic issues like this. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.